because that's an interesting issue. Because right now you can have, I mean, anybody who saw the Catfish, the movie, the amount of lying that goes on online, and actually there's less lying that goes on in email because it's a trail. Most of the lying goes on phone. But I think that there's a lot of people who are not entirely telling the truth for all kinds of reasons. If you're living life out loud and you're posting everything and you don't want people to know something necessarily, you can certainly find a way to cover that up if you want. But it'd be interesting to see about evidence base if it holds up in court.
Yeah, it would be very interesting. There was a question over here. The lady in the exactly with putting no.
There's a mic.
There's a mic there, and then the lady behind you.
I've got the mic. I'm very
I've got
noble.
the mic and I'm not letting it go.
Interesting.
There's that.
Interesting reasons for getting Foursquare started, and so what I'm wondering with pizza, having to check in at 20 pizza places to get a badge, or the stake, like you mentioned, maybe ends up being a disincentive or a detractor to actually doing the positive behaviors that seem to have motivated you to starting Foursquare. How do you reconcile that? And also, what sort of transparency mechanisms are in place for the reasons that certain badges may appear on Foursquare?
Yeah, so I mean, there's like a grand vision for Foursquare that we could work on for 10 years, and it'll probably take us 10 years to get the whole thing done. And making badges for pizza and late nights and going to different parks is just like the very beginning of it. Like if the thing is like with Foursquare, as you're saying before, like it's very consumer based because you have to you track actions and you track actions by checking in. There's just not enough network sensors out there that connect good data. Like I would love to give badges for people that eat healthy, that avoid fast food, that exercise more often, that that volunteer, and but it's hard to prove that stuff. We just don't have the sensors that do that. And so I feel like we're putting the pieces in place so as that stuff comes online, we can just be like, oh, now we can track this, now we can do this, now we can reward people for that. So I think it's just we're just getting started. I don't remember what the second question was.
Transparency.
Like what about?
Of a badge. There was a big article on the front page of the New York Times on Monday about how the USDA is telling people to eat healthier, but then they're also funding all of this cheese promotion.
Yeah.
Yeah, wow.
Oh, like transparency in the numbers or like our intentions?
So, yeah, the intention. What if the cheese promotion folks come to you and say, we want a badge?
Oh, well,
is that transparent?
They have, and we haven't done it yet. We don't want to do that. Like we don't want to incentivize behavior that we don't think is constructive. And like we are the game masters in such a nerdy sense. Like we have designed the system, and we make the rules by which everyone plays for now. But we can open that up for other people to start contributing.
But at the moment, it's a top-down system.
It's a top-down. I mean, remember, like we're at like the very first, like we're the little babies in the system trying to figure stuff out. So right now, it's top-down. Eventually, you try to open these things up.
There's a question behind you. There we go. The lady with the beige coat. Yep.
I just want to go back because we kind of digressed a little bit. I want to go back to Raghava about the topic about data not being like you were saying something about instinct, right?
And
intuition. Or intuition. Well, I just want to point out where intuition comes from. It's really from knowledge of the past. It's like primal knowledge. It comes from the collective experience of life. And your instinct is just your mechanism of filtering through all of that experiences. So if you're saying that we're going to filter this macrocosm of our brain right now, just when we're interconnecting like neurons, then don't you think at some point at the end of it somewhere in the evolution of our society, there will be some kind of global intuition that brings out the kind of work that you do?
I think you're you're confusing knowledge for information. And I think for any of you who have attempted to write something or create something from nothing, your moment of inspiration comes literally from nowhere. And the minute we figure out how to construct an inspired moment, we'd all be making billions of dollars. And I think we can do all the research. And I agree with you, but I don't think data can entirely create
knowledge. Or
data.
Swear.
Go ahead, yes?
But data cannot entirely create, but if it's present, then you know, the data. When I had this talk today, that was from data that people have been ignoring for thousands of years. And if it were not there, I would not have accessed it and connected it.
Right, I agree with you, but I'm not an enemy of data. I'm just not making data the only most important thing. And secondly, we are always, the minute our senses are active, we are taking in data. We do not have to program the way we accumulate data. We don't need to accept structures of acquiring this that are not innate to our cultural upbringing, to our ancestry, or whatever.
Raghava, in terms of your work, when you are in the creative process of building, designing and implementing a piece of art, how do you cut yourself off, or do you cut yourself off from a certain amount of interconnectivity? I mean, literally, what's that process for you?
Unfortunately, a lot of my art process is in evaluating my process. So some of it involves experiments in creating in a public space as versus a private space, in a commercial space as versus a completely experimental space. So it differs, and I've still not found it.
So the old-fashioned kind of, artist garret idea of having to shut yourself up in the attic of your house and shut out all noise and all people for hours on end, that doesn't apply to you anymore.
It does in that I have to introspect. And introspection is very important. I sit down very often. Whether I'm actively painting while I'm introspecting is irrelevant. But I think I do unlearn and rearrange information. That, for me, is equally important.
And during that period of introspection, do you actually have to physically cut yourself off?
Yes, I do.
Sho, is that the same for you?
Architecture is a little bit different, I think, because it's
more collaborative.
More collaborative, but also the givens are not entirely based on your intuition. Basically, you react, you translate the conditions into art form. So you can't entirely cut off, but when you're thinking, when you're filtering the information, then maybe you are cutting off. But also, when you want to make the architecture that is highly integrated to engineering and sustainability and everything, you can never shut off. So it's like a zapping, and you really have to be an editor of the information. So I think that's a bit different from cutting.
Do you think we need the equivalent then of a data dream time? It gives us the downtime to process all of our new sensory information that we're being given.
This is the filters again, and that we have to learn to use. And I think this is where we are babies still. We are still learning the filters. I think we have time for about 2 more questions, because I know that Dennis at least has to run. Right here, the gentleman.
I'm the one that hates fun.
Yeah, I just thought I would, put that all on.
Okay, thank you. I can stay a couple minutes. Jeez.
He has a very cool event to attend, and he'd like to invite all of us to go with him. I'm kidding.
I got a plus 80.
Plus 80. The gentleman here with the glasses, and then up there in the back. Yeah, go ahead. I think you can shout. It's probably fine.
This was all stimulating my you were talking about discernment, and what I'm noticing is that people are becoming less present, less aware of present time. I have teenage children, and what I'm noticing is that they're now so interconnected in so many ways. They'll have 4 different screens on at the same time, and what's happening is they're not spending time being very present. They're shuttling between Facebook
kind of
and
slightly ADD.
texting, but it's kind of ADD, but it's becoming exponential.
Yeah.
So what I'm realizing is that while we can do great things with interconnectivity, like register for 4 colleges, in an hour online, and cut and paste information and fill all this out, that their awareness of where they are in present time is becoming more and more blurred. It's kind of like the virtual, they're talking with somebody online here and they're doing something there. So they're not really anywhere in quality time. And I'm noticing that the younger generations are even getting more used to it. It's almost like fish are unaware of the water they're swimming in. They're unaware that their attention is all over the place in very superficial, quick bites, and there's always another experience, another conversation, another game, another something to go on to. So I was just curious to throw it out as to what happens 2, 3, 4 generations in the future when
I think it's fascinating.
interconnectivity replaces consciousness.
I was just
discernment.
thinking, actually, I was thinking this actually for the BBC. It'd be really interesting for us to take a group of young kids who are the sort of five-year-olds now and follow them every 3 or 4 years and see how their learning is different from ours, and whether it is and whether it's actually, because I think there's an argument now to be made that so what, so they learn differently and so they are more spread out. But that isn't necessarily a bad thing. I mean, I think that would be a really interesting study to take a group and follow, get back with them in 3 years, and then in 6 years, and then in 9 years, and find out. So, well, it'd be 7-Up. It would be the online 7-Up generation, yeah. We have the lady here, right here, with the necklace, and then the man there in the back, and I think we'll have to leave it at that.
By the way, someone has called that continuous partial attention.
Yeah,
continuous partial CPI.
Yeah, it's a drag. It's you really get distracted by all the screens in front of you all the time. Like I feel like a lot of the stuff, a goal of a lot of the designers should be to get people spending less time in front of screens instead of more time in front of screens. And that's totally true for the screens in your house, the TV and the computer. And I feel like some of the stuff we're doing is trying to do that for mobile too. It's like it's a tough problem to solve, especially as there's more stuff coming out.
But you see it, Dennis, as a.
I remember when it was a faux pas to. Oh, hey, excuse me, I got a text message. Let me excuse myself for a minute. And now I'm having a conversation with 2 people, and I'm like, oh yeah, don't worry about it. Yeah, text at the same time.
Is that akin though to having invented the printing press? We're advocating reading less.
I don't know, because it's affecting other folks.
It's not reading less, it's reading more densely. I mean, I think it's not having 4 screens where you're giving each of them 5% of your attention. It's having 1 screen where you're giving it 10% of your attention.
I think we've got too much focus on the screen rather than what's on the screen.
But I think that's where we are.
You're not paying attention to reality because you have a screen in front of you. So you and I are having a conversation and I'm texting at the same time. That's totally normal in my group of friends, but it's rude.
But I think that's just a technique because the young generation in our office too, like they have, they're working on a design and have TV and social network, and they're really good at ignoring these kind of pop-up messages.
Right.
And if I had it, and I always kind of distracted and have to answer those.
With my kids doing homework, I mean, I certainly see that, they're meant to be researching some quite detailed history paper, and actually they've got Facebook up at the same time as well. They've got whatever game it is up, and and their cell phone. And how on earth they can possibly be really understanding what it is that they're meant to be researching? I don't know, because their attention is not there. It's on all the other things. Or maybe they can. Maybe this, and that's why I think it'd be so interesting to take a group of kids, because maybe they will develop the
they will
attention
mutate.
capacity. Let's take the question over here, the mutate.
I just wanted to follow this gentleman here and coming that...
we can't hear you, actually. Is that mic on? The mic may not be on.
Is that okay?
Yeah, better.
Yeah, that's better.
Sorry.
Turn around.
I just wanted to follow this gentleman and saying that it seems like this we are going into an uncharted territory. And psychologically, being a psychologist, I'm very curious, as you say, to understand what will happen to these kids. Where it's action-oriented, it's multifaceted. You get to do a lot of things at the same time. It's very goal-oriented. And the question is, where's the process? And life is about being in the moment and processing. Where are these kids processing? I'd like to meet them and to see what kind of psychology is going to develop here.
I think all kinds of. I have 2 daughters in college, and it's amazing to me because they are constantly involved with their social networks. But what's interesting to me is that they're beginning to make choices. They're making choices of one way in which they will, a dominant form in which they'll communicate. So it's usually text, but there's whole periods of time when they're just not. They won't engage at all. The other thing that I find really interesting is that when I went to college, it was opening up a whole new world for me. They go to college, and that whole world is accessible to them. So that idea about, it's now, education is really about creating filters, because it's all out there. So how do you filter it, and how do you look at it, which is why traditional education is so boring for most people, because if they're spending their time online, their time on the devices, everything is there. You can go deep, you can go wherever you want to go.